So, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, just so that everybody knows, but we will turn off the recording at the end then for the Q&A. So a big thanks to the WCVA for arranging this event today, and a big thanks to you all for joining. If there are any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat at any time, and we'll come back and cover them at the end then for the Q&A. Or if you do prefer in the Q&A section, you can unmute and ask them directly then as well. So, helo pawb a chroeso i'r webinar. Just bod pawb yn gwybod, mae'r webinar yn cael ei recordio heddi, ond byddwn ni yn troi y bant am y cwestiynau ar y diwedd. Diolch yn fawr iawn i'r WCVA am trefnu heddiw, a diolch i chi i gyd am dod yma heddiw. Os mae unrhyw cwestiynau dych chi, please rowch nhw yn y chat unrhyw amser. A byddwn ni'n dod nôl i rheina wedyn ar y diwedd am y Q&A. Neu os mae well dych chi dod off mute yn y Q&A ar diwedd, allwch chi gofyn nhw prynu. So the rest of the webinar will be in English, but if you do want to ask a question in Welsh, then please feel free to do so. We'll repeat the question and answer bilingually then, just to make sure that everyone understands. So my name is Mark Price. I'm the Modern Workplace Strategist at Pew Computers. So I'll be covering the sort of top Microsoft Teams and Zoom features you'll want to be using to get the best experience from your hybrid meetings. And a big thanks to Cadwan Wyn Howells as well for joining us today. So Cadwan will go through her experiences. She's got a range of experience at board level, particularly within third sector organisations. And she's also serving as a current trustee and a director. And as a board administrator, she's had to manage the transition from face-to-face sort of traditional meetings to electronic and hybrid formats. And Carwyn admits it hasn't all been plain sailing, so she'll share some of her most valuable tips and lessons learned with us today, which I'm sure you'll find very useful. So just to start off, just a quick overview of Pew. So we are a WCVA trusted supplier. We've got a great relationship with the WCVA and many of its members. We're a Microsoft Gold partner as well and an Ed LSP and have been for many years. Plus, we're also a Zoom partner. And we're also partnered with many hardware vendors, including Yealink, Smart, Promethean, Logitech, and Jabra. So we've been in business 41 years now, and in that time we've grown expertise in software licensing, hardware solutions, and professional services. Including complete solution packages then, which is where we find most our customers get the most value. And we work a lot with charities and voluntary organisations across Wales and the whole of the UK. So we support many of our customers on their digital transformations. And in particular, recently we're seeing a big push in adoption of the modern workplace, including hybrid working solutions and sustainable modern hybrid meeting spaces. And also working a lot recently on community hall projects and working with community councils to help get them set up to run hybrid meetings and various other community events. So before we look at hybrid meetings, I just want to quickly discuss the sort of infrastructure needed in the first place to make these hybrid meetings possible. So that is the meeting space themselves for the face-to-face participants, and also touch on the devices used to connect into these meetings when joining remotely. It'll only be a quick overview as we already covered all of this in detail in our previous gofod3 webinar on Monday. And I'll post the link to this recording in the chat before we finish here today, so for anybody who couldn't attend then. So first of all, what are sustainable modern hybrid meeting spaces? So they can take many forms, there's no hard and fast rules. They could be meeting rooms, community halls, large boardrooms, even huddle spaces or collaboration pods. And typically you'd have your one-touch join consoles for joining meetings with maximum efficiency. You've got your interactive boards, so these can be used to display remote attendees, bringing everyone together into one high-quality experience. And you can also use them to display presentations and videos, and even use them for digital whiteboarding as well to collaborate and brainstorm our work on sketches and things in real time. And you've got your camera, speakers, and microphones as well, just to make sure everybody's seen and heard clearly. And there's many different options for these devices then, depending on your particular needs. It depends on what sort of room or space you have, the size of the room, the number of people you want to attend, and sort of what kind of events you want to be running then. So we don't do out-the-box solutions. Everybody's needs will be different. So we work with you then to gather your exact requirements and then develop a tailored solution for you then. And as you can see at the bottom there, we do provide trial units and live demos, and we offer installation, training, and technical support to support you then every step of the way. So just to give some examples of different possible options, a lot of companies are now going down the huddle space route or collaboration pods, which really makes the most out of the space they've got. You can have people coming into the office for meetings and to collaborate, and then just staying at home on other days to do their day-to-day tasks. And these here are also the sort of setups you'd have for personal desks or smaller meeting rooms as well. And these examples I'm showing are all Teams Rooms solution, but Yealink do offer equivalent Zoom Rooms solutions for each of these. And also there's options from other vendors as well for these solutions. But as you can see here, you've got your camera, speaker, and microphone. You've got your Teams or Zoom console for the one-touch join. So you can just turn up, tap, and you're straight into the meeting. It really does save a lot of time by not having to hook up laptops and mess around with cables and things like that then. So up to your slightly larger rooms. So this could be your standard meeting room of up to sort of 10 to 12 people or mid-size halls. So you've got your camera to capture everyone in shot, even if you've got long desks. You've got your soundbar speaker, which is a bit more substantial to make sure the audio reaches the entire room then for larger rooms. And you've got a couple of microphones to make sure everybody's heard, no matter where they're sat. And you can even upgrade to larger screens. So if you've got a large hall, for example, you can get larger screens to make sure everybody can see everything in those hybrid meetings, then even from the back. And up to your large rooms, such as this example, where you can have dual cameras to ensure everybody's seen, multiple microphones. You can even have several screens to make sure everybody can see what's going on, and even collaborate then again with the digital whiteboard in real time, as the interactive screens are touch enabled then. And just to touch quickly on the sort of the other side of the meeting. So this is how you're connecting to the meeting space when remote. So whether you're at home, at other locations, or even on the go. So you can have your Microsoft Surface devices, for example. So these are portable, powerful. They've got built-in cameras, speakers, and microphones. So you can take them anywhere with you. You've got your headsets, so these are very useful in noisy environments, and especially with the noise cancelling features as well, so that you can really get your speech across clearly. And that really makes a big difference to hybrid meetings. Getting that engagement. It's critical to hear what's going on and for everyone else to hear you as well. And you've also got your Teams and Zoom handsets, if you prefer a physical desk phone for work, whether that's in the office or at home. So the one we can see here on the screen is actually a Zoom phone, and it's even got a camera for joining hybrid meetings. And obviously that option does give you the option to dial into a hybrid meeting as well then if needed as an alternative. So it's just about equipping your employees and trustees and volunteers with the right tools, really, to be able to connect and engage with hybrid meetings from anywhere then. And again, just briefly, why would you want to adopt these sustainable modern hybrid meeting spaces? So there's plenty of benefits. You've got your efficiency. So as I said, you've got your one-touch join. You can tap and go straight into meetings that way. And also time saved traveling. So things like long haul flights or time spent driving around the country, which isn't very productive. Collaboration is another one. So you can meet easily with people all across the world and really engage with them in a way that would otherwise be impossible or at least very time consuming and costly as well. And that really allows your team to bounce ideas off each other rather than working in isolation. So you can collaborate on the digital whiteboards in real time then on the screens. And you can have some people contributing remotely, plus some people in the meeting room or hall coming up and sharing their own ideas then on the screen and bringing everything together onto one page then. So in terms of sustainability, they're better for the environment. The reduced travel can drastically reduce your carbon footprint. So you can collaborate with people across the world without needing to travel, as we do regularly at Pew with Yealink in China, for example. And there's also massive savings on transport costs there as well. So as we know, costs are going up and up, especially the price of fuel. So there's benefits there. And they also offer great flexibility. So they allow your users to work and collaborate from anywhere. So nowadays, you've got people still working from home, some people returning to the office, some doing a bit of both, and even some who are always on the go. So running these hybrid meetings, you can bring everyone together seamlessly, no matter where they're based. And that really contributes to a better work-life balance then for your team. And as I mentioned, if you want all the details in regards to sustainable modern hybrid spaces, including more of the benefits and how to build them, you can check out our recording of the webinar we ran on Monday. So the link for this recording will be posted in the chat here. So now let's start looking at how to get the most out of your hybrid events. So the first decision you have is what type of event to run. So Teams and Zoom both have three very similar options. So you've got your meetings, your webinars, and live events, as they're called in Teams, or conferences, as they're called in Zoom then. So a meeting is, typically for a number of people to discuss a topic, just like your traditional face-to-face meetings. And although there'll be somebody arranging the meeting, usually there's no sort of presenter or host. Everyone's at an equal level within that meeting then, and everyone can interact with each other. And there are no registrations, so people are invited to the meeting then. Webinars then are similar to meetings, but they have distinct roles for organisers and presenters compared to regular attendees. So usually there'll be somebody presenting within a webinar, and then other attendees, although they are attendees, they are usually given a chance to interact in some form, whether that's asking questions or giving feedback via chat or through the microphone then as well. Plus webinars do support registrations then, so you can keep a track of who is planning on attending. And then once finished, you can report on the people who actually did attend. And the third option then, live events in Teams or conferences in Zoom. They tend to be larger events and more of a one-way broadcast. So typically you'd have your host and presenters broadcasting to a large audience who are usually viewers only then, but they can be a Q&A if needed. So today we'll be looking at meetings and webinars mainly, as these are probably what you'll be using for your hybrid events. In a hybrid meeting, you could have people attending face-to-face within a meeting room or a hall, plus people attending remotely via Teams or Zoom. And with the right setups then, as we touched on already, all attendees will be able to get involved and engage with each other then, no matter where they're based. And similarly with hybrid webinars, you can have people attending face-to-face and remotely, and even the presenters either face-to-face or presenting remotely then as well. So we've touched on this already, but let's take a slightly more detailed look at the roles within these events. So as I said, in Teams meetings, all participants typically interact at an equal level. With Zoom, there are slightly different roles in meetings, as you can see on the screen. So you'd have your host who schedules the meeting, so there can only be one host. And then when the meeting is scheduled, that host can assign an alternative host who can actually start the meeting as well. And once in the meeting, the host can assign co-hosts then. These can only be assigned once the meeting has started, and they can help manage attendees and things as the meeting goes on then. So in terms of webinars, within Teams, you have your organizer who schedules the webinar, plus you have presenters and participants. At the moment, you can only have one organizer for a Teams webinar, and they're the person who can access registrations and post webinar reports. But Microsoft are currently working on an update that will soon allow co-organizers to be assigned. So this will be a very useful feature because, you know, having that just one organizer can be restrictive at times. So you've got your presenters then who are assigned and they can talk and share their screen, and then everybody else joins as a participant in that webinar then. And you could decide then within that webinar if you want your regular participants to be able to do things like turn their cameras and microphones on, depending on the level of interaction you want. And then Zoom webinars, so similarly, you have your host. Again, there can only be one. So they'd have full control over the webinar, including things like starting and stopping the webinar. A host can assign a co-host then to help manage again. So they can start and stop recordings and manage attendees as well. And then you've got your panelist, who is a full participant within a Zoom webinar. So depending on the rights assigned by the host, a panelist can do things like share their screen and annotate slides if the host decides they want that. And then finally, you've got your attendee to a Zoom webinar, which is they join in a view-only mode then. So they can interact through the chat and the Q&A, but they can only speak if unmuted by the host then. So these roles are important to keep in mind if you are running a hybrid event. You know, you'll want to give your face-to-face and remote attendees or even presenters, you know, the same level of permissions to keep things consistent and fair then. So for example, if you're running a meeting, you might want people to jump in with ideas and opinions, and you'll want to make this clear to all attendees at the start. And you can make sure that even remote attendees can then unmute themselves and talk when they wish, just to ensure that everyone's on a level playing field then. And similarly, in a webinar, for example, if you only wanted people to ask questions when invited to do so, you'll want to ensure that both face-to-face and remote attendees are required to raise their hands before talking then, for example. And finally, for webinars, if you do need to keep track of people attending and possibly follow up with correspondence and things like that as well, you can ensure that registrations are turned on. So these registration pages are fully customizable, and you can request specific information then from the users as they register. And afterwards then, you know, these reports can be viewed and downloaded, and they'll show who attended, when they joined, when they left, along with their email address if that's requested. Plus, if you only want specific people involved in your event or some users you may not want to join, you can choose to have a lobby then where attendees will stay in there until they're admitted into the actual meeting then by the host or presenter. So this next slide, it might seem a bit obvious, but in online or hybrid meetings, you know, it's often what causes the most issues for remote attendees. It's absolutely critical to make sure you have the right devices selected for your speakers or headsets, and also your microphones and cameras as well. So Teams and Zoom have easy to use menus for these. As you can see, you just need to select from the drop-down lists which device you want to use for each. And both allow you to do this before the meeting or webinar, so that you get plenty of time to set things up beforehand. And also within the meeting or webinar itself. So if you have any problems or need to switch to another device halfway through, you can do that. And this is where the sort of hybrid working devices we looked at earlier are essential, really. So you'll want good quality devices to get the best possible experience. And that includes Teams and Zoom compatible or certified devices. So compatible devices mean that they've been tested and they work with that particular platform. And certified devices then mean they've been officially approved by Microsoft or Zoom to provide the highest quality experience possible then. And a couple of other things to mention here quickly. So when you're joining a meeting or webinar, it's best practice to join muted, just so as not to interrupt anything that may have already started. And you can easily turn your microphone on as soon as you've joined anyway then. Also background images and blurred backgrounds. So that depends on your preference and your location. So these can be set beforehand, or you can do that once you're in the event. So let's talk about recordings and transcriptions next. So again, both Teams and Zoom provide these functionalities, and they're very useful for hybrid meetings and webinars, as they allow both remote attendees and face-to-face attendees to go back and watch the event again. So that's something that simply was not possible with traditional face-to-face meetings and events. And there are settings then so you can record these automatically as soon as the event starts, or these can be turned on manually as well. And by default, Teams will also start the transcription when the recording starts, so that's very useful. Who can start and stop the recording? That could be defined in the settings again, so you can set it to just the organizer, or whether the presenters can do it, or even within a meeting you can set it so that anyone can start the recording then. So that's up to you. And Zoom actually also provides an option for specific users to record the event. So as you can see on the screen there, if users are given permission by the host in the first place, they can record their own copy of the event, and that could be saved on their local device then, so they immediately have their own copy as soon as the event finishes. And that'll show in the participants list there, as you can see at the bottom, so that will show exactly who is recording the event then. For online and hybrid events, it's always best practice to ensure that if the event is or can be recorded, that all attendees are made aware of this beforehand, so they have a decision then before anything starts as to whether or not they wish to take part in the event. And by doing this, you sort of just cover yourself, really. So if the attendees remain in the event, then they're indirectly providing their permission then for the recording to take place. Because of course, once an event has been recorded, that can end up being uploaded anywhere, really. So it's just out of respect for your attendees, really. So as well as the recording, the transcriptions can be very useful as well. So particularly for important meetings or AGMs, as they allow you to download a copy for your records. And the transcriptions are also searchable. So if you want to locate a particular time when a topic was discussed or a particular comment was made, you can search for them in the transcript. And of course, as long as the meeting space devices are of a high enough quality and there are enough microphones as well positioned correctly, the transcriptions will pick up face-to-face attendees talking as well as the remote attendees. And you can also choose to have live captions displayed. So these are useful if you haven't got any sound or if you've got users with hearing impairments. So you can just have them on as preference as well if you want. Some people just choose to have them on. And Carwen will actually touch on the subject of recordings later on too, as she discusses, how these are stored and the recording of personal data, meeting minutes, and GDPR compliance as well. So keep an eye out for that later on. So looking at translations, and this will be of particular importance to everyone based in Wales. So this is currently one of the biggest differences between Teams and Zoom, and often why one is selected over the other, maybe for hybrid events. So Zoom actually provides the functionality for simultaneous language interpretations, and at the moment Teams does not. But Microsoft are working on developing this functionality, so hopefully it'll be implemented in Teams in the near future then. So Teams is a single track for audio, whereas with Zoom you can have multi-track audio. And put simply, this means that in Teams, the language the presenter speaks is the language you must listen to, whereas in Zoom you can nominate users to act as translators. And you can have several of those covering different languages. And in the example on the screen there, you can see the attendees can select to hear the presentation translated to English, French, or Spanish, for example. And this will be translated live then by that nominated user, or they can just turn it off then to hear the original audio. So these nominated users will be decided beforehand then, and they'll be clear of the role that they're taking on. And coming back to my point about Welsh organisations, attendees of Zoom events can therefore select to hear the speaker in the native language, such as English, or translated into Welsh or any other provided language then. So although this is very useful for remote attendees, as they have control over their own preferences, naturally it's a bit different for face-to-face attendees. Although you could set it up so that the audio in the meeting room or hall, for example, is translated into Welsh for all those face-to-face attendees. So, for example, if it's a particular Welsh branch of a UK-wide organisation, this can be very handy, and then the other attendees can select alternative languages then as they wish. So there's usually some sort of presentation in all webinars and often meetings too. And Teams and Zoom both offer this functionality. So there are a couple of different options to consider though. So for example, you can choose to share a PowerPoint presentation directly, or you can share your entire screen so that you capture your presentation and anything else you bring up. So videos or documents, for example. And you can also share a particular window, or Zoom even lets you share specific portions of your screen, which can be very useful. And again, there are a few things to consider in a hybrid environment. So for example, when a remote user is presenting, it's easy for other remote attendees to view this on their own device, but as well as the face-to-face, the face-to-face attendees can also view it on a large interactive board as well. However, when the presenter is at the meeting space venue, it's easy for the face-to-face attendees to view, but you also need to make sure that the remote attendees have a good experience as well then. So this can either be done by the presenter sharing their screen on a computer in the meeting space and presenting in front of a camera positioned nearby, or they can bring up the presentation directly on the interactive board and have a second camera pointing towards it, for example. So that means you can see the presenter and a full view of the meeting space at the same time. Or a simpler solution, you can even have a camera in the meeting space set up that can be rotated to point towards the board during presentations, and then rotated back to the face-to-face participants afterwards, then depending on sort of what setup you have. And in this scenario, a good quality optical zoom camera would be most suitable to allow you to sort of display everything clearly, no matter how far away it is then. And it all depends on what sort of events you run and what sort of budgets you have, really. But a few quick tips to mention. If you do want a particular remote attendee to be displayed on screen more prominently, you can either pin them, which affects just your view, and that'll make them sort of larger than the other cameras. Or you can spotlight them as well then, which affects every attendee's view. And spotlighting can be restricted then to just hosts or presenters if you want. And both pinning and spotlighting are available in both Teams and Zoom then. So in addition to sharing presentations or sharing your screen, a very useful tool within online and hybrid events is the ability to share and collaborate on digital whiteboards. And this is something that's definitely geared more towards meetings as opposed to webinars. And it's perfect for things like brainstorming. You can generate ideas, create mind maps, create sketches and prototype designs and so on. And Teams includes a Microsoft Whiteboard integrated into all their meetings. And that whiteboard will then stay within the meeting tab along with the chat and the files and the notes and everything else in one easy to find place. And Zoom also provides a whiteboard tool as well, so that allows hybrid users to collaborate in real time through Zoom. And again, for hybrid setups, it's easy enough for remote attendees to contribute directly on the whiteboard through their own devices. And then with face-to-face attendees, you have a couple of options again. So either they could be invited up to a computer in the meeting space, which is connected directly into the Teams or Zoom meeting, or there are interactive collaboration devices now. So for example, the Yealink Meeting Board 65 is a new one, and that will connect directly to a Teams or Zoom meeting. So it's a large touch-enabled screen on a stand that participants can walk up to, and they can collaborate in real time with any remote participants then, even on the whiteboards. And that provides a much sort of more natural whiteboarding experience then, rather than doing it on a computer or a laptop. But again, there's different options depending on your budget then. And as with whiteboarding, you can also co-author documents, such as Word documents and PowerPoint presentations directly within Teams. So as seen here, you can see exactly what changes have been made since you've last opened that document and who's made those changes. And that'll all be tracked and color-coded by person to make it easier to keep track of. And you can upload files as well. So once you upload a file within a Teams meeting, it'll actually create a copy then, leaving your original file on the computer untouched. So that's very useful if you just want that one version within Teams that everyone can work on together, instead of sort of merging every time some changes are made, which can get very complex. And if you need a local copy, then once everyone has agreed that no more changes are needed, you can just download that copy back to your device as a local copy. Zoom doesn't allow sort of co-authoring as such, but it does provide the functionality for different users to collaborate using annotations. And this just isn't just for whiteboards, as we saw, but you can also annotate on documents being shared and even on screen shares as well. And again, these things are easy for remote attendees. But again, using a device such as the Yealink Meeting Board 65, it's possible for face-to-face attendees can contribute directly via the board. And also file sharing within meetings. So that's another one. Again, once you share a file within a Teams meeting, that will store that file in a tab then together with everything else related to that meeting. So you can go back and locate that and revisit it. So breakout rooms are another very useful tool for hybrid meetings. So you can split meetings up into separate breakout rooms for discussions and bring everyone back in once finished. So room participants can be set to random, or they can be selected manually then by the host. And you can also set whether or not they get automatically moved or whether they have a choice to join or stay in the main meeting. And the users will get a message up on screen then to say they've been assigned, and that will open a new window then for a breakout room. And once in, it's basically like a mini meeting, so you can the host can pop in to different breakout rooms as they wish, And this could definitely work in a hybrid meeting setup as well. So you could have a number of breakout rooms for remote attendees and a number of breakout rooms or groups for face-to-face attendees. And then each group can meet up and discuss, the given topics, and get back and share their thoughts, ideas, and conclusions. And you can even you can get everyone to present those findings, whether remote or face-to-face attendees, on a shared digital whiteboard, for example, to record all the outcomes on one big page then. Voting is another thing that's especially important for AGMs, and also hybrid AGMs. So both Teams and Zoom offer voting and polling functionalities. So Zoom has this functionality built in by default, whereas with Teams, you just need to add the Forms app. So this is done, fairly quickly with just a few clicks, really. And those polls and the results will stay in the meeting chat afterwards then if you want to revisit them. And although this provides a good option for remote attendees, particularly when only dealing with one-to-one voting, there are some complexities when it comes to face-to-face attendees as well, and more complex voting requirements. And Carwen will actually share some of her experiences around this topic shortly, including a process they use to deal with these complex voting requirements. People might have more than one vote, and things like proxy votes as well comes into it then as well. And if this is something you actually use often, it might be worth looking into DoPoll, which is a third-party tool. So this actually allows you to run complex polls either physically or electronically then. And finally, just to quickly cover reactions within hybrid meetings and webinars. So obviously, face-to-face attendees can raise their hands or clap or give any sort of feedback whenever they want. And these reactions will be captured on camera for all remote attendees to see as well. But what is often less obvious is reactions and feedback from remote attendees. So that is what these Teams and Zoom reactions do, really. So they provide remote attendees with the same or at least similar capabilities as to those in the meeting room or hall itself. So remote attendees can raise their hands if they want to speak. They can also give a thumbs up or show that they're applauding the speaker as well. And these are also very useful in large meetings if somebody wants to indicate they wish to speak instead of just trying to sort of shout the loudest over the others. So with that, I'd just like to bring in Carwen, who is going to share her own experiences of managing the move to hybrid meetings, and also some of the critical lessons learned that we may not have considered so far, but can actually play a vital role in successfully running these hybrid events. So yeah, over to you, Carwen.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for that very useful overview of the pros and cons of meetings, webinars, etc. My name's Carwen Winhals. I've got a range of experience on a number of boards, primarily in the third sector. And I think the first thing I have to tell you is I am no IT expert. So my experience, to a certain extent, has been very much as a result of being dropped in it from a very great height and having to learn how to cope. For years, when organisations have been organising general meetings, they followed a set pattern. And generally speaking, things worked well. There was the odd hiccup, but generally each year you had a formal process with set stages for doing things, and things rolled on. Though I must admit, one of the advantages of having moved to electronic and hybrid meetings is I really do not miss having to stuff 500 plus envelopes full of notices for meetings, etc. It's fair to say that when a certain little virus raised its head, and I'm not talking a virus of the IT variety, it forced a number of organisations to rethink how it managed its organisation, and in particular, how it complied with legal requirements to have, for example, things like general meetings. A number of organisations, certainly during the lockdown, all opted for full electronic meetings. And whilst it was a steep learning curve, on the whole, people found a way through it and they worked. But After 2 years, people are beginning to recognise the value of face-to-face contact, and a number of organisations are now considering going down the hybrid route rather than solely a face-to-face or solely an electronic route. Now, some of this will seem very obvious to you, but before you start doing anything, can you check that your governing documents, your constitutions, your rule books, whatever you call them, actually make provision to hold a general meeting in an electronic format or hybrid format, and that there is also provision within your rule book for electronic voting? It's surprising how many organisations, particularly smaller organisations, have not updated their governing documents to reflect electronic means. And you need to do that well ahead of a general meeting, because you may well need to have legal advice and a paragraph inserted to enable you to actually organise an electronic or hybrid format meeting. Mark mentioned voting. And the one thing I've discovered over the past 2 years is that if you've got one person, one vote, life is relatively straightforward and you can do the voting electronically, no difficulty at all. But one of the organisations I deal with has a range of shareholders where you can have individual shareholders, club shareholders, network shareholders, federation shareholders, and each of those people can also act as proxies for other parts of the organisation. And it's possible to have one individual carrying a range of different types of votes. And I soon realised that if you were going to leave voting until the day, it was going to prove too complex to manage easily. And we've taken the decision with this particular organisation to actually do all of our voting ahead of the meeting. And I'll explain how we do that. It certainly assists the smooth running of the meeting. And one of the things I became very conscious of when doing things in electronic or hybrid format is that you can't afford to have a hiatus in the middle of a meeting while somebody beavers away in order to try and verify a voting process. So my advice would be, if you have the opportunity to do any votes ahead of the meeting, I would certainly suggest that you do that. As you're aware from what Mark has said, both in this webinar and in the previous webinar, that your selection of platform and system that you use is key to a successful meeting. You need to ensure that any notice that you issue for a general meeting complies with, again, your governing documents, because most governing documents will specify a time at which you need to give the notice of the meeting. Ensure that all relevant papers are posted ahead of the meeting. Now, with the one organisation that I'm dealing with, we have a shareholders webpage, and we actually ensure that all the notices, all the relevant papers are put up on that shareholder section, so they have adequate time to be able to digest the minutes, the notices of the meeting, plus all the supporting papers ahead of any voting. If you're having to run elections at a general meeting, then please ensure that nomination forms are made available well in advance and that you have received your nominations, so that summary of your nominees can again be posted on your website ahead of any voting taking place. What we found useful was to actually have a fixed period for registration and for nomination of proxies. And I've learned you don't give people too long to think about it. So we've adopted a policy where we open registration on one Saturday, we close registration the following Saturday, we have The nomination of proxies open the same day, they close the same day. Then we have a 24-hour gap, which enables people like the share registrar and the board administrator to actually verify that all the registration are bona fide and that people are eligible to cast the votes they're claiming that they're able to cast. And then we open our voting and we allow 5 days for voting. Voting closes 24 hours ahead of the general meeting. So again, all the votes can be verified and collated so that by the time the meeting comes, you've actually got the result to be able to give to your participants. So it enables you to have a smooth running meeting. We select what are known as tellers to enable us to have people verifying the process, and they are in the background overseeing each stage of the process so that we do have, for want of a better description, a quality control mechanism to ensure that we are complying with our governing documents. Sometimes you assume that organising an electronic meeting or a hybrid format is going to be much simpler than organising a face-to-face general meeting. The answer is no, it's not. In many ways, an electronic or hybrid format requires far more forward planning and thought than a face-to-face meeting. In the good old days, as a board administrator sitting next to the chairman, I could always kick the chairman under the table or pass them notes if things were going wrong. Whereas you can't do that in an electronic or hybrid meeting. And you also need to assign different roles to people because whereas a chairman will still be able to chair the meeting, you oftentimes need a separate host. You also need somebody to moderate the questions that are coming in. And whereas in a face-to-face meeting, 1 or 2 individuals can do it simply by casting an eye over the audience, you can't do that with an electronic or hybrid format. So you do need to be able to assign roles well in ahead of the meeting. The other thing I tend to do is to ensure that my chairman has what I call a noddy guide. Basically, they're given a schedule of the running order, so they know exactly when people are going to be registering, when the meeting is going to be starting, at which point people are going to be muted or unmuted, and there is a script for them. So because what is important with these meetings is that they are seen to be professional and they are seen to be smooth running. And if you're going to do that, then actually, as I say, there needs to be a lot of preparation done beforehand so that it looks because it's very easy. Presenting something on a screen is very different to doing it on a face-to-face. And you have to be seen to be doing it smoothly and in a professional manner. You need to ensure that all the people you've assigned roles to are comfortable with those roles. And sometimes, particularly if it's a small organisation that doesn't meet that frequently, having a dry run with your key post holders for the day is actually quite a good idea. So because not everybody is au fait with using IT systems on a day-to-day basis, and they may need a dry run, and that's useful. One of the things that I recommend to people now is that with the GDPR regulations, I tend to adopt what's known as the Chatham House style of recording minutes, where basically you don't attribute things to individuals. You can attribute things to specific posts like chairman or director or trustee, but generally speaking, you don't identify individuals, and that enables you to comply with GDPR. If you are using an outside agency to assist you in the meeting and to assist with the recording, it's helpful to have a written undertaking by all those involved ahead of the meeting so that all transcripts and personal information can be removed within a defined time frame. And this again is to enable you to comply with the regulations. We've mentioned the fact this morning that there are, if you like, pros and cons to face-to-face electronic versus hybrid. For a number of people, a hybrid format, if they're linking in remotely, can have a number of benefits. They have the ability to participate in the chat, they can have WhatsApp groups in the background, and they can be fully participating. And that's not so easy for the people who are face-to-face in the room. Though, as Mark has said, there are ways around this. But on the one hand, you think that the people linking in electronically have got the benefits, but unless the meeting is well chaired, you can find that your external participants can be left as observers and actually feel quite remote from the meeting itself. So it's important that whoever is chairing the meeting involves, if you like, both sides, so that everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in the meeting. At the end of it, needless to say, get feedback. And don't ignore the feedback, but build on that experience. Because believe you me, you won't get it right first time. And there will be lessons learned. And it's important that you learn from those lessons. One thing we do with one of our meetings is we actually open the meeting up early. Because for an annual general meeting, particularly of something like shareholders, oftentimes it was the only time of the year that these people would meet. And so we have an informal session where people can actually chat to each other, catch up with the gossip before we actually start the formal meeting. And people actually appreciate that. If you're dealing with international audiences, then please consider the timing. Because please don't expect a chairman to chair a meeting effectively at something like 4 o'clock in the morning. So please be aware of where your international participants are coming from and select a time that actually suits your chairman, because at the end of the day, they are the people who are having to manage the meeting and run the meeting. And if you're going to want a smooth meeting, then it's essential that the timing actually suits the chairman concerned. Also, Mark has mentioned translation facilities, and certainly in Wales, the key translation is English, Welsh, Welsh, English. But if you've got an international audience, you may have to accommodate other languages. And you also need to be aware that some languages, the length of time taken to translate is not equivalent. So, for example, if somebody's speaking in English while somebody's translating into Mandarin, the Mandarin translation will take far longer than the English. It's the way Mandarin works. One of the last things is please be pleasant and helpful to everyone. Not everybody participating, particularly if you're a small voluntary organisation, not everybody is au fait with the technology, and oftentimes they don't use it on a day-to-day basis. So do try and be supportive. For example, when my shareholders vote, I actually do wing a note saying, thank you very much for your vote. It has now been forwarded to the tellers. And actually keeping that contact does make people feel valued, and that's important, because oftentimes with remote meetings, whilst people can participate, they don't necessarily feel engaged with the meeting. Last but by no means least, ensure you've got a contingency plan, because things don't necessarily go according to plan, and it's useful to have a backup situation. I hope I've briefly covered a raft of issues. As I say, I'm no expert. A lot of this has been learnt, set by serendipity almost, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Karen. So I'll just stop the spotlighting. So I'll go back to these slides. So yeah, once again, thanks very much, Caravan, for sharing those experiences with us. And like I said, I'm sure you'll all agree that those tips and lessons learned will be absolutely critical for you as you plan your own transition to hybrid meetings. So it's not just about the technology; it's about everything that Caravan discussed as well. Then, and even if you're making use of these hybrid meetings already, I'm sure you'll find some use in that. So thank you very much. And that brings us to the Q&A. So we'll stop the recording now, if that's okay, Rodri, please. And we'll give you all a